You didn't find this video by accident. And if part of you still believes that, that's exactly how close you were to missing it. Because what's happening in your life right now is not random. It's not confusion. It's not failure. And it's definitely not the end of something. It's the final stage before everything changes. And almost no one recognizes it while they're inside it. So before we go any further, subscribe to Unshakable Mind. Because what you're about to hear is not for people who are still asleep. This is for the ones who felt everything collapse and didn't run. The ones who stayed in the discomfort long enough to start seeing differently. The ones who didn't numb themselves when it got hard, but leaned into it. If that's you, you already know something is shifting. You just don't fully understand it yet. And that's exactly where Carl Jung's most dangerous insight begins. He didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in synchronicity, the idea that when something appears in your external world, it reflects a transformation already happening inside you, which means this moment, right now, is not something you randomly stumbled into. You were led here because something in you already recognizes the truth your conscious mind is still trying to catch up with. You didn't fail the test. You passed it, and the proof is hidden in what you survived. Most people think the universe rewards them with clarity, stability, and success when they're ready. But Jung understood something far more unsettling. The universe tests you by taking everything away that you thought defined you. Your plans begin to fall apart. Your relationships shift or collapse. The version of your future you were holding on to dissolves. And in that moment, it feels like loss. It feels like you're being pushed backward. It feels like everything is going wrong at once. But that's not what's actually happening. You're being stripped, not punished, not abandoned, prepared, because the version of you that is about to emerge cannot exist inside the old structure you were trying to maintain. And this is where almost everyone fails. They resist it. They fight to rebuild what was just taken from them. They try to return to comfort, to certainty, to the familiar identity that is already collapsing. They distract themselves. They numb themselves. They blame the world. And without realizing it, they walk away from the exact moment that would have changed everything. But you didn't. You stayed. Even if you didn't understand why. Even if it hurt more than anything you've experienced before. Even if there were moments where you questioned everything about yourself. You didn't run. And that is the first and most undeniable sign. You passed the test. Because the test was never about success. It was never about achievement. It was about one thing. Can you stay present when everything you used to rely on disappears? Can you sit inside uncertainty without immediately trying to escape it? Can you face yourself without distraction? Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the moment where your external identity starts breaking down so your real self can begin to emerge. And it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like destruction, because the ego, the version of you that was built to survive, to be accepted, to fit, interprets this transformation as a threat. It will try to convince you that something is wrong, that you need to fix things, that you need to go back, that you need to regain control. But the deeper part of you knows something else. It knows this is necessary. It knows this is the threshold. And if you're honest with yourself, you've already started noticing it. You don't react the same way anymore. Things that used to trigger you don't hit as deeply. Certain people, conversations, environments feel different, almost like they no longer match who you are becoming. And that feeling can be confusing, even isolating, because you're no longer fully aligned with your past, but you haven't fully stepped into your future either. You're in between, and this in-between space is where transformation actually happens. Most people panic here. They rush to define themselves again. They cling to identities, labels, roles, anything that gives them a sense of certainty. But the ones who pass the test learn to stay in it. They allow the silence. They allow the uncertainty. They allow the process to unfold without forcing it. And that's when something subtle begins to change. Not outside, inside. You start to develop a different relationship with discomfort. You stop seeing it as something to eliminate and start seeing it as something to understand. Pain stops being an enemy and becomes information. Fear stops being something to avoid and becomes a signal. And this is where the real shift begins, because the universe is not testing your strength. It's testing your awareness. It's not asking if you can control everything. It's asking if you can trust what's unfolding. even when you don't fully understand it. And if you've made it this far, if you're still here, if something inside you is resonating instead of resisting, then you're not at the beginning anymore. You're already through the hardest part. But this is where it gets deeper, because passing the test was only the first step. What comes next is what separates the ones who truly transform from the ones who slowly drift back into who they used to be. And if you're ready for that, then stay with me, because what you're about to understand next will completely change how you see your life from this point forward. The moment you stop trying to go back, that's when everything truly began. Not when things improved, not when clarity arrived, but when you realized you couldn't return to who you used to be because something inside you had already crossed a line, a silent one, irreversible, unseen by everyone else, but undeniable to you. If you feel that, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, because what you're experiencing is rare, and very few people will ever understand it the way you're about to. There comes a point in this process where the pain is no longer the main signal. Something else replaces it, a strange calm, a quiet detachment, not cold, not numb, but different. You begin to notice that what once consumed you no longer has the same grip. Situations that would have triggered you before now pass through you. People who once held emotional weight begin to feel distant. And at first, this can be unsettling, because you start asking yourself, why don't I feel the same anymore? Why does everything seem quieter? Why do I feel like I'm stepping away from my own life? But what you're actually experiencing is not disconnection. It's separation. Separation from what was never truly you. Carl Jung described this as the withdrawal of projections, the moment where you stop seeing your identity reflected in everything around you and begin to see yourself directly. And this is where the second sign appears. You stop needing constant emotional reactions to feel alive. Before, intensity was your normal, highs and lows, attachment and fear, validation and doubt. Now, something changes. You don't chase intensity anymore. You observe it. And this is one of the most misunderstood stages of transformation, because people around you may start to notice it. They might say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're not the same anymore. And they're right. You're not, but not in the way they think. You're not losing yourself. You're finally separating from everything that wasn't aligned with who you truly are. And that creates distance, not because you want to disconnect, but because you can no longer force connection where there is no truth. And if you've felt that, if you've noticed yourself pulling back from things that once felt natural, write in the comments, I see it now. Not for anyone else, but as a moment of recognition for yourself. Because this is where the real shift deepens. You begin to develop something that most people never fully access: discernment, the ability to feel what is real and what is performance. You walk into a room and you sense the energy immediately. You hear words, but you feel what's behind them. You see behavior, but you recognize the pattern beneath it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's why things start to feel different. Not because the world changed, but because your perception did. And with that perception comes responsibility, because now you have to choose. Do you continue engaging with what you know is misaligned? Or do you begin stepping into something unfamiliar, but real? This is where most people hesitate, because truth requires action, and action creates consequences. Relationships shift, conversations become uncomfortable, silence becomes more frequent, not because you're becoming antisocial, but because you're no longer willing to participate in what drains you. And that's the third sign. You begin to protect your energy without needing to explain yourself. Before, you needed reasons, you needed justification, you needed people to understand why you said no. Now, you simply feel it. And that's enough. You don't over-explain. You don't defend your boundaries. You don't negotiate your inner state just to maintain external harmony. And this is where your power starts becoming visible. Not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable. Because when someone is no longer seeking permission to exist, their presence changes. They stop asking, is this okay? And start asking, is this true for me? That question alone separates you from the majority of people, because most people live reacting to the outside. Very few live responding from within. And once that shift happens, you begin to notice something even deeper. You're no longer afraid of being alone, not in the superficial sense, but in the real one, the kind of solitude where there is no distraction, no validation, no external feedback, just you. And instead of panic, there is space. And in that space, something powerful emerges. Clarity. Not forced, not intellectual, but natural. You start understanding things without needing explanation. You begin connecting patterns from your past, without effort. Moments that once felt random now feel intentional. Pain that once felt meaningless now reveals direction. And this is where Jung's idea of synchronicity becomes real. Because as your internal world reorganizes, your external reality begins to respond. Opportunities appear, conversations shift, paths open, not because you forced them, but because you aligned with them. And that's when you realize something that changes everything. The test was never about surviving the chaos. It was about becoming someone who no longer needs chaos to evolve. And that realization is where the next phase begins. Because now, you are no longer reacting to life. You are participating in it consciously. And what comes next is where everything you've been through finally starts making sense. Something else begins to happen. Quietly, but with undeniable depth. You stop trying to resolve everything. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood something most people never reach. Not everything in life is meant to be solved. Some things are meant to be held. Carl Jung devoted a significant part of his work to what he called the coincidentia oppositorum, the union of opposites. The mature psyche is not the one that eliminates contradiction. It is the one that can sustain it without collapsing. And if you're honest with yourself, you didn't develop this ability by choice. You were forced into it. Life placed you in situations where simple answers didn't work, where clarity wasn't available, where certainty didn't exist. And instead of breaking, you adapted. You learned how to stand inside ambiguity without losing yourself. You learned that you can feel love and pain toward the same person at the same time, without needing to destroy one to justify the other. You learned that you can feel peace, while still recognizing that parts of your life must change. You learned that you can trust the process, even when you don't understand where it's taking you. And this ability, this capacity to hold tension without rushing to escape it, is one of the clearest signs you didn't just survive the test. You integrated it. Most people cannot do this. They need certainty. They need clarity. They need everything to make immediate sense. And when it doesn't, they panic. They force conclusions. They escape discomfort. They choose illusions over depth. But you didn't. You stayed long enough to become someone who can carry complexity. And that changed you, not on the surface, but at the level where identity is formed. And if you recognize yourself in this, write in the comments, I can hold both, because that's not weakness, that's psychological maturity. And from that maturity, another shift emerges. A quiet one, but irreversible. You stop living under the weight of other people's opinions. Not in an arrogant way, not in a dismissive way, but in a deeply grounded way. You realize something that rewires how you move through the world. What people think about you is not about you. It never was. It's about their projections, their fears, their expectations, their limitations. And once that becomes real to you, not intellectually but viscerally, you stop contorting yourself to fit into those expectations. Not because you don't care about people, but because you finally understand that trying to please everyone is a form of self-betrayal. Most people are still trapped in that invisible prison. They make decisions based on imagined judgment. They choose their words based on approval. They shape their lives around acceptance. And they call it normal. But you've already started walking out of that structure. And it wasn't easy. You probably lost people. You probably faced resistance. You probably felt misunderstood, judged, even rejected. Because when you stop performing, people who were comfortable with your performance no longer know how to relate to you. But on the other side of that, you found something that cannot be taken from you. Freedom. Real freedom. The freedom to exist without filtering every thought, without editing every action, without calculating every move based on external reactions. And Jung understood the weight of that. He said the greatest tragedy in human life is to die without ever becoming who you truly are. And you stepped away from that tragedy. Not perfectly, not completely, but consciously. And that alone places you in a completely different trajectory than most people, because now you are no longer trying to become acceptable. You are becoming real. And from that place, another sign begins to reveal itself, a deeper one. You start noticing patterns in reality that others ignore. You stop believing in pure coincidence, not in a superstitious way, but in a perceptive way. When something repeats, you pay attention. When a situation keeps showing up, you observe it. When certain doors open effortlessly, you recognize it. When others close repeatedly, you question it. And this is where Jung's concept of synchronicity becomes something you don't just understand, you experience. Because synchronicity is not about magic, it's about alignment. When your internal world begins to organize, your external reality starts reflecting that organization, and you begin to see it, not because the world changed, but because your perception expanded. Answers start appearing in unexpected ways. A conversation gives you clarity. A book reaches you at the exact moment you need it. A message appears and shifts your entire perspective. And this isn't random, it's response. You're no longer navigating life purely through logic. You're integrating something deeper. Intuition, pattern recognition, subtle awareness, inner guidance. And that changes everything. Because now, you're not just reacting to life, you're reading it. And when you start reading life this way, you realize something that most people miss completely. Reality is not just happening to you, it's responding to you. And if that realization is starting to land, write in the comments, I see the patterns. Because once you see them, you cannot go back to blindness. And this brings you to another level of the test, one that few people even reach. You begin to find meaning where others only see randomness. Situations that once felt like chaos now reveal structure. Pain that once felt pointless now shows direction. Delays that once felt frustrating now make sense in hindsight. And this is where your entire relationship with life transforms. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to show me? And that question alone places you in a completely different reality, because meaning is what separates suffering from transformation. And the fact that you can now extract meaning from your experience means something has fundamentally changed inside you. You're no longer just living events. You're understanding them. And that understanding is what prepares you for what comes next. Because passing the test was never the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Something most people never reach. Because they turn back right before it begins. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, where everything shifts again. Not outside, inside. You stop asking why things happened and start understanding what they did to you. If this is resonating, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, because what you're experiencing is not common, and very few people ever learn how to move through it consciously. Most people see painful experiences as interruptions. You don't anymore. You've developed something rare, the ability to extract meaning, even from what hurt you the most, not in a naive way. Not by pretending everything was meant to be, but by asking a different question. What is this shaping inside me? What is this trying to develop in me? What part of me is being forged through this? And that question alone changes everything, because suffering without meaning destroys people, but suffering with awareness transforms them. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He observed that individuals who can find meaning in their experiences, even the most difficult ones, develop a form of inner strength that is almost impossible to break, not because they avoid pain, but because they metabolize it. They turn it into something else: wisdom, clarity, discernment. And if you look at your own life honestly, you'll see it. Every loss taught you something about detachment. Every betrayal sharpened your ability to see truth in others. Every moment of isolation forced you to meet yourself more deeply. You didn't choose those experiences, but you chose not to waste them. And that is one of the clearest signs. You passed the test because you stopped being a victim of your experiences and became a student of them. Most people never make that shift. They repeat patterns. They blame circumstances. They stay trapped in cycles. But you started extracting value from what you went through. And if you feel that, write in the comments, I turned pain into power, because that's not just a phrase, that's transformation. And from that transformation, something even deeper emerges. A peace that is no longer dependent on what happens around you. This is where things become undeniable, because now, even when life is unstable, you are not. You can be in the middle of uncertainty and still feel grounded. You can be facing challenges and still carry a quiet stability inside you. And this isn't indifference. It's not apathy. It's not emotional disconnection. It's something much stronger. It's a center, a place inside you that remains, even when everything else moves. Most people don't have this. Their emotional state depends entirely on external conditions. If things go well, they feel good. If things fall apart, they collapse. But you've built something different. You found a point within yourself that doesn't move so easily. And you didn't find it in comfort. You found it in chaos. When everything was falling apart and you had nowhere to run, you were forced to go inward. At first, it was small. Just a breath, a moment of stillness, a pause between thoughts. But you stayed there, you learned how to access it, you expanded it, and now it's part of you. Carl Jung spoke about this as the discovery of the self. Not the personality, not the ego, but something deeper, something that remains untouched by the turbulence of life. And you didn't just understand this concept, you experienced it. Now, even when things affect you, there is a part of you observing, calm, steady, untouched, and that changes how you move through everything. Because now, you don't react the same way, you respond. And that response comes from a place most people never reach. And this leads to another unmistakable sign. You no longer sabotage the good that enters your life. This is where many people fail, even after growth. They say they want love, but reject it when it comes. They say they want success, but feel uncomfortable when they achieve it. They say they want abundance, but unconsciously push it away. Because deep down, they don't feel worthy. But something changed in you. You went through a process where you faced your own sense of worth. You questioned it. You challenged it. You dismantled the beliefs that told you you have to suffer to deserve. You have to prove your value. You have to earn your place. And slowly, those beliefs started losing their grip. You realized something simple, but powerful. You don't need to suffer to be worthy. You don't need to shrink to be accepted. You don't need to struggle endlessly to justify your existence. And because of that, you became capable of receiving love without suspicion, receiving success without minimizing it, receiving abundance without guilt. And that is rare, because most people resist what they claim to want. But you started allowing it, not perfectly, but consciously. And if you felt that shift, write in the comments, "I allow what is meant for me." Because that's not passive, that's alignment. And this is where everything comes together. Because the test was never just about enduring pain. It was about becoming someone who can feel deeply without breaking, see clearly without denying reality, stand firmly without needing external validation, receive fully without sabotaging it. And if you've developed even part of this, then you are no longer where you used to be. You are already inside. A different phase. A phase where life stops feeling like something happening to you and starts feeling like something moving through you. And what comes next is where everything you've built internally begins to reflect externally. And when that starts happening, there is one final sign that confirms everything. Now, everything begins to respond differently. Not because the world changed, but because you did. There's a subtle shift in how life meets you. Opportunities that once felt distant begin to feel accessible. Conversations start carrying more depth. Decisions become clearer, even without perfect information. And at first, it almost feels strange, like something is aligning behind the scenes. But nothing mystical was added to your life. You simply became someone capable of recognizing what was always there. Synchronicities don't increase randomly. They become visible, because your perception is no longer clouded by confusion, fear, or constant resistance. You start noticing patterns where others see coincidence. You recognize timing where others see luck. You sense direction where others feel lost. And this is where everything begins to reorganize. Not dramatically, but precisely. Relationships start changing, not because you forced anything, but because you're no longer trying to extract from others what only you can give yourself. You don't chase connection anymore. You allow resonance. And because of that, the people who remain begin to feel different, more aligned, more honest, more real. The same happens with your work, your projects, your path. Things don't necessarily become easy, but they become coherent. You stop fighting against the natural rhythm of things. You stop forcing outcomes that aren't ready. And instead, you begin to move with timing. And timing changes everything. Because when action and alignment meet, effort stops feeling like struggle. It starts feeling like flow. But this doesn't mean life becomes perfect. You still face challenges. You still experience uncertainty. You're still human. The difference is, you no longer collapse inside those experiences. When something difficult happens, you don't immediately panic. A part of you remains steady, observing, curious, present. You ask different questions now. What is this showing me? What is this refining in me? How can I move through this consciously? And that alone transforms how you experience everything, because you are no longer resisting reality. You are working with it. And this is where another shift becomes undeniable. Life starts presenting you with what actually matches who you are. Not who you thought you should be, not who you were trying to become, but who you are now. People appear who understand you without explanation. Opportunities arise that use your real abilities. Situations open that allow you to contribute in meaningful ways, not because you earned some kind of reward, but because you stopped rejecting alignment. And when you stop rejecting what is aligned, you naturally step into it. This is the difference. Most people are still trying to become something. You're starting to live from what you've already become. And if you've recognized yourself in this journey, pause for a moment, because this matters more than you think. You didn't just go through something difficult. You didn't just survive a phase. You went through a refinement, a process that reshaped how you see, feel, respond, and exist. And the fact that you can now recognize it is not small. Many people go through transformation, but never fully integrate it. They grow, but don't acknowledge it. They evolve, but don't trust it. You did something different. You became aware of it. And that awareness is one of the clearest signs of maturity. You are no longer completely identified with your emotions. You are no longer lost in your circumstances. You are no longer reacting blindly to what happened. There is a part of you now that observes, that understands, that sees patterns beneath the surface. Carl Jung called this the development of consciousness, and he believed it was one of the greatest achievements a human being could reach. Because consciousness doesn't just change your life, it changes how you exist within life. And with that comes something important: responsibility. Not in a heavy or overwhelming way, but in a natural way. Because once you see, you can't unsee. Once you understand, you can't pretend you don't. And because of that, you begin to show up differently. You become more patient with people who are still learning what you've already lived through. You bring calm into situations where others react emotionally. You make decisions that consider not only yourself, but the impact around you. You don't force your perspective on others. But when the moment is right, you share it. Not to prove anything, but because it's part of who you are now. And this is where something deeper reveals itself. Your growth was never just for you. It was also for what you bring into the world through it. Not in a grand or dramatic way, but in subtle, powerful ways. Through presence, through clarity, through the way you respond instead of react. And over time, you begin to realize something almost impossible to explain. You are not alone in this. There are others, not physically gathered, not organized, but present. People who went through similar transformations, who faced their own depths, who chose awareness instead of escape. You recognize them, not by what they say, but by how they are. And that recognition creates something quiet, but powerful. A sense of belonging that doesn't depend on proximity, because it's not based on identity. It's based on awareness. And this is where everything comes full circle, because passing the test was never about reaching an endpoint. It was about becoming someone capable of living differently. And now, you are, not perfectly, not completely, but consciously. And that is enough, because from here, everything you build, everything you choose, everything you create comes from a place that is real. And that is where your life truly begins. And now you understand something most people never fully grasp. There is no certificate, no external confirmation, no moment where the world stops and tells you, you made it, because the recognition happens inside, quietly, irreversibly. You begin to see your own path with clarity that doesn't need validation. You begin to trust what you've lived, without needing anyone else to confirm it. You begin to stand in your own transformation, without questioning if it's real. And that's when it becomes undeniable. You didn't just go through something. You became someone who faced what most people avoid, someone who stayed when it would have been easier to escape, someone who chose awareness over comfort. And because of that, you now exist in a different relationship with life, not separate from others, but no longer dependent on the same illusions. And when you look around, you start to recognize something subtle. There are others like you, not gathered in one place, not organized under a name, not following a doctrine, but connected through experience, through awareness, through the decision to face themselves instead of running. It's not a visible community. It's a field, a resonance. You recognize them not by what they say, but by how they move. There's a stillness, a presence, a depth that doesn't need to announce itself. And when you encounter it, you feel it immediately, because it reflects something you've already found in yourself. And this is where your journey evolves again, because now it's no longer about becoming. It's about embodying, living from what you've already integrated, not occasionally, not when it's easy, but consistently in your decisions, in your relationships, in how you respond to life when it challenges you again, because it will, not as a test anymore, but as an opportunity to apply what you've become. And this is where most people hesitate. They understand, but they don't act. They feel, but they don't integrate. They see the truth, but slowly drift back into old patterns, not because they're weak, but because transformation requires continuity. And this is your moment to decide differently, not through intensity, but through commitment, a quiet, grounded decision. I will not go back to who I was, not because the past was wrong, but because you've outgrown it. And if something inside you is fully recognizing this, if this isn't just information, but confirmation, then anchor it right now, right in the comments. I recognize who I've become, not for anyone else, but as a conscious acknowledgement of your own evolution, because recognition solidifies transformation, and without it, even the deepest shifts can fade. Now understand this clearly. You didn't reach this point by accident. You didn't randomly arrive here. Every experience you went through, every challenge, every moment that forced you to confront yourself led you here. And if you're still here now, then you are not meant to ignore it. You are meant to live it, to step fully into this new level of awareness, to move through life not as someone searching, but as someone aligned. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to become something else. You just need to continue from here. Because from this point forward, everything you build comes from truth. Everything you choose comes from clarity. Everything you attract comes from alignment. And that changes the entire structure of your life. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of the version of you that no longer doubts the path. The version of you that no longer abandons itself. The version of you that understands that the real transformation was never outside. It was always within. And now you're living from it. We'll go deeper in the next video.